Patrick, welcome.
Thank you.
So we're doing this online actually because we thought we were going to meet in person, didn't we? And that would have been much more exciting to be able to be in a studio together. But I'm afraid we're having to do this online. But it's great to see you.
Absolutely.
And as I think I've told you, I'm a big fan of Graphenstone paints. I've used a lot of them in various properties that I have. And what I particularly love is your more specialized paints. So we'll get onto that later. But I wondered if
Yes.
you would start by telling us your own journey into working at Graphenstone and maybe a little bit about, why you think Graphenstone stands out within the paint market, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thank you so much for having me on the program. It's great to chat, especially to a loyal customer. So thanks very much indeed for that, Charlie. So just a very brief background. I've worked for myself for about 30 years now, so pretty much at the far end of my career. And I came across Graphenstone in Spain back in about 9 years ago now, in fact. And it took us about 2 years to get to the launch pad because it's a very complicated, it's a very detailed business paint. There's a huge amount to get together for a paint launch of a range of different types of products and so on. So going back a little bit further, Graphenstone was founded by a paint scientist whose mission was to try and create a clean paint, but which didn't compromise on performance. Because as you know, lots of sustainable products are marvelously green, but not necessarily very effective. You compromise typically on green products. So he set to work, and his ingredient of choice was lime. And lime's the most fantastic product. It really is the sort of king of ingredients in paints because it has all of these fantastic characteristics. For example, very high pH, which means nothing grows on it. It's antibacterial in effect, as you know, lime is antibacterial. It's highly breathable. It's the most breathable paint ingredient you can get. So you don't get that blocking of moisture behind the walls, which causes, SBS, sick building syndrome. It's fireproof. Yeah. It doesn't smell. In fact, it absorbs smells. It has this wonderful characteristic of actually reabsorbing CO2 at the point of use as it cures on the wall after application, most of it in the first 30 days.
Wow.
No VOCs. It's very abundant in terms of tons of it around the world. So that was his preference. The problem with lime is that it's quite brittle. If you brush your hand or your clothes against a lime paint, typically it comes off. And you have to repaint it frequently, which is not very sustainable. So he tried all the usual things like fibers and horsehairs and so on to try and strengthen it. And those just simply do not do the job. So it happened to coincide with the announcement a couple of years before of this magic ingredient called graphene. And graphene is a discovery from inert pure carbon. And without going into too much of the detail about graphene at this stage, the fusion of this amazing nanomaterial with the lime achieved the dream result, which is a lovely clean paint, class 1 strength, washable, and yet with all of the benefits of a lime paint. So that was the very beginning of the brand, and obviously a lot of progress has been made since then developing out other products.
Yeah, that's fascinating actually, because I never realized that actually it's the lime in the paint that absorbs the CO2. Because I'm a big fan of your more purifying paints, I think you call them.
Yes.
And I just love the idea that basically we can use paints to combat some of our pollution and our carbon issues in the environment.
I mean, I'd love to claim it was something clever that we'd invented. It's absolutely not. It really is sort of nature at its best, because in the process, it's called the lime cycle. It's a very established bit of science. And in effect, when you start with your limestone and you heat it up, you eventually cook it, and then you add the water to turn it into liquid. It's called slaking the lime. and you turn it from calcium carbonate into calcium hydroxide. And as it then goes back on the wall, after painting it on your wall, as it dries and the water leaves the paint, it starts the process of reabsorbing a lot of the CO2 that was cooked off in the heating process. So you get a kind of natural recovery of the CO2 back into the paint. And so if you then add to the fact that when you're using natural minerals, it's a much lower carbon process in terms of the embedded carbon footprint than if you were using oil. Because to go from a barrel of oil to paint is an enormous number of processes, very intensive in carbon. So it means we have one of the lowest carbon footprints in the industry, which is a real plus for us.
That's fantastic. And how long does it normally last? As in the kind of activation process of sucking CO2 out the atmosphere, how does that happen very quickly and then it stops? Or?
Yes. I mean, most of it happens inside the first few weeks, maybe it's 4, 6, 8 weeks. It continues, but the graph slows down a lot. Most of the recovery is quick, and then it slows down. You get a little bit for quite a long time going forward, but most of it is pretty quick in the first few weeks after application.
Okay, and would you suggest that, because I've seen it in commercial settings, I think more than residential settings, or at least I've seen it used, maybe in kind of, as I think we were talking about earlier, like outside graffiti areas or on streets, basically, maybe where they've got more problems with air pollution. Would you say it's more used in kind of outside products?
I mean, the impact will be greater indoors, of course, because obviously you've got a confined space. Whereas if it's outdoors, that you'll still get the same impact, the same activity and air purification, but of course it's going to be far less noticeable to your average person than it would be inside an interior space.
Okay. And so then would you recommend that as part of like an air quality management program within your home?
I mean, certainly it's a huge change from, let's call them standard paints, because standard paint systems are manufactured principally from oil. They release VOCs. The subject of VOCs is a very interesting one because there's a trade term which is called low VOC because it comes in different thresholds, different levels of intensity. And low means anything up to 30 grams a litre. So it's not really very low at all. Because if you buy a 4-litre, 5-litre pot, that's a lot of VOCs that are going to be leaching out for months and even years after you've applied it to the wall.
Wow.
So Graphenstone is trace level. That's less than 0.1 of 1%, which is virtually nothing at all. So even if your standard paint you go and buy from a well-known brand is, 4 or 5% VOCs, we are literally dozens and dozens of times lower in terms of VOC settings. So,
and VOCs are volatile organic compounds, and tell me why they are particularly bad for us.
Well, these are the light gases and chemicals that come off the paint as it's drying. So as the water evaporates off, a lot of those VOCs are coming out in the process, but they continue to come out even after the smell has gone. So they'll continue to leach out even though you can't smell them at all for a long time afterwards. So that's a big difference from a product like ours that has virtually no VOCs at all. I mean, literally a fraction of 1%. And a lot of those are naturally occurring. So yes, in terms of the management of an interior space and air quality, I think Graphenstone is a very, very good choice from that perspective.
Yeah, that's why I really like to recommend it to people that are redecorating nurseries and stuff, or like preparing bedrooms for children, because I think obviously children are much more susceptible to air pollution issues than even adults. Basically, as they grow and they develop, it can have a massive effect on both their kind of breathing,
Absolutely.
and their
Yes.
nervous systems. But so I think it's great to be able to have such an eco paint that they can use. I don't know whether you know this about me, but actually paint was what got me into working in what I do at the moment, because
Really,
I
I
was
didn't know that.
working, I was working on a project actually in Margate. We were just talking about Margate, but actually
Yes.
in Margate called Dreamland. And I actually became really ill because the paints that we were specifying were the horrible kind of oil-based that leave a layer of plastic basically on the wall so nothing can breathe. And we were actually working in an environment that had no ventilation, no nothing. And these paints and other chemicals were involved, were making me sicker and sicker and sicker. And
Really. It
in the
really
end,
affects some people very significantly. We have one product, Charlie, which is in a way what we consider to be the sort of king of our range. It's called Ambient Pro Plus. And Ambient Pro is a lime-based paint again, so it has all of those characteristics we mentioned earlier. But it's a photocatalytic paint as well, so it actually has a photocatalytic product in it called anatase titanium dioxide. And that reacts with light, whether it's daylight or ambient light. And it starts a chemical reaction just off the surface of the paint, where the anatase titanium reaction reaches out from the surface and neutralizes airborne toxins like SOx or NOx and renders them harmless, literally sort of breaks them up. And they fall away from the surface of the paint. So it doesn't make the paint surface dirty either. And that's ongoing for years after the application of the paint. So having a product which technically has the capabilities to clean the air actively is a pretty big change from the normal, oil-based products, which are, in effect, adding toxins to your interior air.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's also one thing saying that your paint product doesn't damage like other ones that are oil-based, let's say, but it goes even further to saying it's actually going to improve your environment, which is amazing. I love products that go that bit further and actually kind of sort of add to the environment and sort of optimize your environment rather than just make it neutral, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the meaning behind the purifying paints that we use, is to purify the space in which we inhabit, whether it's in the office or the home, and also help purify the industry, because the industry itself has not had the best of reputations. It's quite a toxic industry. It uses tens of millions of tons of plastics. One of the side effects of that is the fact that quite a lot of microbeads and so on end up in the oceans. I think one report I read was 1.9 million tons a year, which is a sort of unimaginable amount. I mean, even if that's an exaggeration, it was a very thorough report from a well-respected body in Switzerland called Environmental Action. And, 1.9 million tons of microbeads a year. So even if it's a third of that, it's a huge amount. And where they thought it was something like 10% of all microplastics were from paints, their estimate was well over 50%. So it's definitely an industry where there's work to be done to make it better. But to be fair to the industry, it is working hard to improve. I mean, every paint brand is doing its best to try and get cleaner. So we're heading in the right direction.
And these microbeads, are they coming from the process of creating the paint, or are they coming from the waste product or disposal afterwards?
Well, imagine it's mainly coming from the breakdown of the paints at the end of life.
Okay.
Because if you think how many millions of acres of paints there are on walls and ceilings and interiors of properties, it's a huge amount. And of course, every 5 or 10 years, people repaint, and sometimes they'll sand it away, or the building will get demolished, or it'll peel off. And of course, that goes into the air, it goes down the drain, it goes onto the land, but quite a lot of that ends up in the waterways. And so that's how principally it's impacting, Mother Nature. And of course, you've got as well spraying of paints. If you see people on the side of buildings on a gantry spraying the side of the building, you'll see a lot hits the wall, sticks to it, but you'll see a fine spray all the time, gets carried off into the wind, and so on. So there's several ways in which these microbeads end up in the ocean.
Yeah, and obviously what damages our environment tends to damage us as well. So, there's lots of reports over the last couple of years showing how, these microplastics have ended up in human bodies and human blood, and how most of us now, if we have these tests done, I've done the test myself and I've got microplastics in me.
Really? Have you?
Yeah, even though I'm pretty conscious and pretty careful about, filtering my water and, not eating anything with kind of pesticides or anything on it. I think it's, inescapable now because we've been surrounded by plastics for so long. But yeah, it's quite a horrible thought.
I'll give you a tiny bit of data on that because I read a report from a magazine called Science a while ago. This was 3-4 years ago now, probably. And it was the University of Utah did a study which covered around 6 to 7% of Western landmass in the US, only 6 to 7%. And they calculated the equivalent of 120 or 1.2 million bottles of plastic water bottles were raining down into just that area of the United States in the form of tiny, tiny bits of microplastics. So if you extrapolate that across the United States, whether it was 120 million or 1.2 million, I can't remember, it was an enormous, I think it was 120 million. It was 120 million, an enormous number. So so it's not surprising that that's then getting into the plants, into water, into food and everything else.
Yeah, it's really alarming, actually. But no, that's great because I know that you guys are really focused on sustainability and are well known for your ethics around sustainability. And I saw recently that you've changed, or maybe you've done this quite a while ago, actually, but I was just looking at your website earlier. And the color swatches and stuff that you use, I think I'm right in thinking they used to be in little pots, but now they've been changed to little swatch cards. And I think from reading you're using kind of recyclable paper or wood or...
Yes, they're completely...
Tell me more about that anyway.
They're completely recyclable. I mean, obviously, they're a lot more convenient than sample pots because you receive a nice splotch of color which you can stick straight onto the wall. You can reuse it. It's very clever. It's got these little tiny suction cups, minute. So you can put it off and put it on the wall, literally dozens, or even hundreds of times, I'm told. I've not done it, of course. But so they're very, very good in terms of reuse and 100% recyclable and using also recycled materials in them. And of course, there's about 97% reduction in the paint use and a huge increase in convenience compared to a wet sample pot. So yeah, they're a winner, and we're really delighted to be offering.
It's such a great idea, and also even from because I used to dispose of so many those little sample pots basically, and also you only really need to tell a tiny little dab of each one to see which color you like. And the beauty of having the swatches is that actually, as we all know, the color looks different in different rooms or different environments depending on how the light's hitting it, etc. So it's great to be able to just shift it around basically. Because obviously if you painted in one area and you've used all your sample pot, then you can't really kind of try it in another area.
It's just so much more convenient all the way around. One thing we're going to be doing is with the new range, which we're launching in May with English Heritage, under license with English Heritage. Fantastic tie-up for us. So proud of that. We're going to put together a colour box, which will have one of each of the 120 new house shades in it. So it'd be fantastic for interior designers, of course, because they'll then have the full range there, very accessible, reusable, and so on.
Yeah, that's amazing. When is that launching?
Launching 1st of May. We have 96 colours at the moment, so we're going to archive quite a lot of those, over 50. So there'll be a large number of new colours, of which about 24 of them will be specific to English heritage, sourced from scans of different areas of English heritage properties. And so very authentic, really beautiful range of colours, which hopefully will see us through for a couple more years after May.
Yeah, great. And will they be your standard paint, or will they be purifying paints within there as well?
Yeah, interesting question. They'll certainly be our standard range.
Uh-huh.
The lime paints, we're restricted again by Mother Nature to a degree there, Charlie, because lime being so high in pH, it means that it only can work with certain pigments. Because if you use the wrong type of pigment, the lime literally eats them up, and your color will fade. So the only colors that we can really use with those very active air purifying lime based paints are very pastel colors. So we have a range of pastels, but you can't use the darker shades. So in order to have the full range of colors, we use other materials alongside lime, like clay and silicates and chalk and so on. So other carbonates, in other words, so that we can get to a full range of colors.
Amazing. That sounds great.
Yeah.
I'll look out for that for sure. I wanted to ask you about one of my favorite products of yours called it's called the Pro Shield, which I've used in my house. Now, I know that you've mentioned it's not something that you sell in the UK generally, but as I'm a bit of a anti-EMF radiation nut, I've deliberately pestered you for it from Spain, and basically painted it into my bedroom. And you can obviously explain a little bit better probably about the properties of this paint, but the idea with it is that you paint it on the walls, and you have and it creates like a barrier that bounces off particularly Wi-Fi radiation and creates a kind of Faraday cage. Now, in my view, that's great because I like to be able to sleep in an environment that's completely away from any type of radiation, whether that be Wi-Fi radiation or the radiation that comes from electro-domestic products or whatever.
Yes.
I know that everyone thinks I'm a bit of a nut, but this is the goal anyway. So, and it's quite an involved process because not only do you have to use the paint, you obviously have to ground it, because it's my understanding that it creates a bit of an electrical charge in the way that it prevents the Wi-Fi radiation, etc., coming through. I probably just completely made this up.
No, you're absolutely on the right track, Charlie. Funny enough, it's mostly used by some of our larger chain store customers. Zara use it, Mango, for example, and they use it actually in their stock rooms, because in their case, what they're trying to do is not stop the signals from coming in. They're trying to stop the scanning signals from going out. So it gives them a clean reading of all the stock in the space. So it further demonstrates the point. Basically, what it is, it's a very thick black paint that has much more graphene fiber in it than our standard paints. And the reason for that is so that you can put an electric current through it and earth it. So obviously you're not going to get electrified if you touch it. But in the process of doing that, you basically create, as you say, this Faraday cage, and that blocks signals from either going in or coming out. And it achieves the desired effect. So that's how it works.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And obviously it's quite an involved process. So you need to get someone that's an expert to install it, because I needed to put film over my windows as well, because you have to create the entire loop, I guess, so that the radiation isn't creeping in from anywhere else. So yeah, it's quite involved. I don't know whether I'd do it again in a massive hurry, but it was interesting to try it out. But what I find,
that's why we don't typically retail this to retail customers, because there is quite a significant added challenge to the installation process. But for some people, that's going to be a price that they're very happy to pay. So it depends on need. Certainly for corporates and so on, there's a lot of logic for it, which is why we actually sell a lot of it to retail.
Yeah, I never thought about the fact that it would be used in storerooms, actually. I thought about potentially that it might be used in data centers where if people are working in an office, for example, on the other side of a lot of electrical equipment, for example, it could be beneficial. And also, we were talking earlier briefly about perhaps it could be used, for security measures where there's lots of kind of, I don't know, important data on people's specific computers, maybe to add another kind of level of security to that. Who knows? Maybe it'll be used for that in the future.
Absolutely. As you'll probably guess, I'm not an expert on security, but technically there's perhaps good reasons why that could work. But obviously, it's something that they would need to test first to see the efficacy of it and whether it provides the impact that they need.
Perhaps we'll start a new trend here.
Exactly. Absolutely.
I did think the interesting thing for me about that was you really need to kind of do the process in somewhere that you're living full time and that you own, preferably, because I don't think the landlord might be that enamored with these kind of really dark black walls, basically. Obviously, you paint over the top in your own color.
Yes.
But still, it's relatively costly to do. So you need to know that you're going to be staying in the property for a while. So there are other things that I've recommended to people, basically, if they're renting or if they're moving around quite a lot. But yeah, I thought the process was just really interesting, and it seems to be working really well, which is cool.
Yeah. Well, there you go. I mean, if you have a sensitivity to those things, it's a really interesting solution.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So tell me more about what's coming down the pipe in Graphenstone then. Is there any other exciting products that I need to look out for? Obviously, we'd be looking out for the collaboration with English Heritage, which would be great. Are there any interesting collaborations or projects that you've worked on recently that you'd like to talk about?
Yes, I mean, color's a really, really interesting subject because, of course, for design, it's one of the critical features. So what we like to say is that we've got you on color because we have a huge range of colors. I mean, we can't get them all on a house color card, of course, which will only really satisfy about 120 shades, but we have literally thousands of colors and we color match too. So getting to the color you want isn't really the issue. And just to finish off, on this color related point, what we're really trying to do with our messaging is to explain to people that the consideration these days, given what's going on ecologically around the world, is beyond the color. In other words, once you've chosen your shade, which brand do you use to minimize the impact on the environment and to maximize the benefits or the quality of the air in the space that you're going to be decorating? I mean, those are really, really important points. So having said that, we love color. I mentioned English Heritage. That's a very significant new departure for us, a new range that we're launching in a couple of months' time. We're working with Royal Ballet and Opera. We have a fantastic range of new colors which we're developing with them on supporting their different new shows. So, for example, Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, each of them have 4 colors and they're beautiful shades, some fantastic imagery coming with those. We work with a very influential interior designer called Rose Uniacke that you might have come across. She, for example, is very close to the Beckhams and redesigns their houses. And we've just literally painted Victoria Beckham's showroom in one of Rose's colors called Thyme, being Thyme, like the herb. And we have some lovely images of those that we're hoping to put out on social fairly soon. So we do a lot. We did a range with Ashmolean Museum, the oldest museum in the world, literally sort of 300-400 years old. We did a range with them called the Treasured Collection, which linked famous artifacts of theirs with specific colors. like John Ruskin's Kingfisher, and a fantastic Stradivarius a violin called the Messiah. So yes, very, very into our colours, and we have some really lovely collaborations to demonstrate that.
Amazing. I can't wait to see that. And also, I find it really interesting that, as you say, there's loads of issues at the moment, especially in this country, around the issues of mould, basically, and damp in property. And that is coming to light more and more and more, especially when I go to meetings where, the borough councils or whatever are involved. And, it's a massive problem. And so I think it's just amazing to be able to have paint that moves us away from these plasticky paints, which were half of the problem anyway. And not only are they kind of ruining air quality within the property, but they're just, not allowing the walls to breathe.
Yeah.
In light of kind of looking at damp issues, do you have a particular product that you would recommend for that?
Well, all of the Graphenstone's range, Charlie, are Class 1 breathable. So that's the first thing. And I think it's testament as well to what's in the paints, which, as you know, they're all certified by the most revered independent product evaluation agencies around the world, like Cradle to Cradle. They do an incredibly thorough, holistic review of all aspects of our operation, ingredients, and so on. So breathability is a really important issue. So number one, the moisture can pass freely through the paint. Nothing gets trapped. So as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, you don't get those issues of SBS, sick building syndrome, where all of that rotten dampness eventually pushes away through the paint, plastic paints, and you see them kind of blow out, and all of that damaging molds and spores enter your space. The second thing is again a feature of nature, nothing we've invented, which is lime being very high pH, which really inhibits anything growing on it. So that really helps too. So those two together have a pretty powerful impact.
And would you recommend? Sorry, I'll let you go in a minute. I just had
absolutely.
Just thinking of my own decorating needs here, basically.
Yes.
Would you recommend potentially using two different products on one wall? For example, I've got like a Victorian-ish property here, and it has like a dado rail, and I've considered basically using something like the lime paint above, where it's less traffic and going to be knocked less, because I love the idea of the CO2 absorption, etc. And then using one of your other paints below that maybe is a bit more hard wearing, and combine the both.
Yeah, I mean, if there's an architectural break, as they say, between the two areas, you can absolutely do that. I mean, we do it. We recommend it all the time. In fact, between, for example, the matte paints and the eggshells. We don't go any higher sheen than eggshell, simply because we don't want to be using loads of plastic in the paints. I mean, any brand that gives you a gloss or even a satin, certainly a high gloss, is using loads of plastics. I mean, an exterior wood eggshell, for example, can be, up to 80-90% plastic content. So in the case you're talking about, internally, there's no issue there with weathering. So you could certainly use, whichever variety of products you wish to, as I say, assuming that you've got that architectural break between the two different ranges.
Yeah, that would be, I'll give it a go then. So my last question to you, Patrick, and thank you very much for your time today.
Not at all.
But I just wondered if there was anything coming in the paint and interior design world that maybe we should be aware of. I know we touched on colour and obviously the interesting ranges that you've got coming out with English Heritage, but are there any new innovations that we should know about that are helping with, the climate concerns, or are there any other kind of like ways that we're kind of going to be using paint, basically?
Well, I mean, the graphene discoveries is a pretty interesting one already, because it's allowed us to fuse very ancient, trusted materials like lime with the latest technology, carbon technology. So that in itself has propelled trusted, natural, sustainable materials into the 21st century with, a vinyl acrylic type performance, class 1 strength. So that's pretty good. I mean, I think that really the answer I would give to this is, as much as anything, it's making people aware that if they're prepared to pay a little extra for their paints, because minerals, digging them out the ground is never going to be as cheap as drilling for oil. Oil comes out much more easily. It's much cheaper as a base than minerals. So with that extra cost, you're getting some very important benefits. You're getting health benefits. You're getting environmental benefits. And there's a fantastic study that came out a few years ago called The Economics of Biophilia. And it's by a very well-respected agency in America called Terrapin Bright Green. And I urge people to have a look at it, because when bigger companies look at the numbers, they really begin to see that it's not just a saving on materials, there's a huge net benefit to them. Because, for example, if you give people a biophilic type environment, what I mean by that is, biophilia is the human's inherent love of nature. And as we all move into towns, we're kind of getting more and more divorced from that. So a biophilic environment is, lovely, clean materials, very low levels of VOCs, biomimicry, which is basically emulating shapes and colors of nature in the space, water features, all those kind of things, lovely views. If you can give all of those people those things, which is more expensive, they'll reward you by being healthier, considerably, much better productivity. They stay in their same role for longer. And all of those things have a much bigger impact for the corporation than this small extra cost of those clean materials. So I think education is really key. And for those big brands that we work with at the moment, for example, we do all of Meta's interiors in the UK, all of their offices. We're specified on the new Google HQ. Because those big brands, they have to be seen to be doing the right thing, and they want to, because they understand that actually this is a very good cost-saving measure. So I think, bizarrely, it's not just materials and advancement. As much as anything else these days, this is about making people aware, educating them that there are these new options around.
Yeah, what a brilliant message to finish with. And I couldn't agree more, because I often find that that's what I'm trying to convince people of, that it's worth paying the extra money. And there are times when it's not that much extra, but it's definitely worth paying the extra money and taking maybe the extra time to source these kind of more biophilic products, these healthier products, basically, because generally, not only are they going to probably last you longer, but they're healthier for you and they're healthier for the planet. And, and now it's great because we've got data coming out from people like the International Well Building Institute that also shows that it's increasing the price of properties, basically, either new build or secondhand, that have used these, health strategies basically in their design. And so the argument can't be any longer that, it's not worth putting the money in, because, it's always worth putting the money in for the human health, but it's always been a bit like, but we can't afford it because prices have gone up and basically we can't afford it anymore. Like, well, actually, now it shows you that it's worth doing it because you're going to get the return on your investment as well.
Absolutely, Charlie. And you mentioned well. I mean, all of our main paint ranges are cradle-to-cradle certified. That gives us automatic use in well, BREEAM and LEED projects. And as you say, those projects that use those high-level certifications, high-level standards of sustainability, they're worth more because they can demand more in rent and so on and so forth. So there's a big payback.
Yeah, and also as you touched on earlier, in corporate environments, basically, it's a struggle at the moment still to get people to go back to the office. So if you're creating an environment that is healthier and much nicer to be in,
Yes,
and you're lowering
absolutely.
absenteeism and increasing productivity, then it's a win-win. So it's worth the
Absolutely.
kind of extra pennies.
Absolutely. I think people are even starting to choose where they work based on the quality of life, the quality of the air, and so on in the building. I'll finish with one last statistic for you, which is
Please.
a really interesting one. And I caught it in. It was entitled "Every Breath We Take," and we breathe something like 20,000 times a day, and we inhale around 11. These are average numbers, of course. And we're all slightly different. 11,000 liters of oxygen. This weighs over 5 times the food we eat, just in terms of the air that we breathe. So over a lifetime, is something like 300,000 kilograms, 250 million liters. So you can imagine the impact of where you have a clean office where you're spending hours and hours a day, or an unclean one, a toxic one. It's really a very significant factor.
Absolutely. And that transfers back to the home as well, because with WELL accreditation, I often have the argument that because generally they focus on, the office spaces or retail spaces, it's all very well working in an amazing environment that's been, optimized for maximum productivity in the workspace. But if you're coming back to a home that's highly toxic, then it's no good either. So we need to take a holistic approach and basically look at all our spaces and lift them in health and well-being.
Well, you're the poster child to demonstrate that it works, as far as I can see.
Well, I'm trying. Let's see.
Yes.
But it's really nice, as you say, to just see people's mindset change a little bit around the cost and the price, because it's always a really disappointing thing when people get back and they say, no, actually, I want to prioritize, profit over human health or environmental health. And that's always really disappointing. But it's nice to see that mindset is changing as well now.
Yeah. Well, you can now have something that's clean, sustainable, and cost effective, and also beautiful, with no compromise on performance. And I think that's where Graphenstone has a good profile.
Amen. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for all your time today. It's been really amazing chatting with you. And thanks for all your insight.
Lovely stuff. Thank you so much.